Hello, Hellions. Welcome to episode 7a, where we're going to learn another feature of Old English poetry, Kennings. And you have some example of modern Kennings there on the screen. Ooh, but this is such a good day to come to linguistics. I'm so glad you decided to come to class today. Today I get to tell you my favorite word story of all. But before I get to that, we're going to have a little opening, the Lord's Prayer in Old English. Isn't that lovely? If you're a Christian, perhaps you find it beautiful to know in what words the Our Father, how Jesus taught his disciples to pray, would have ascended to God. In English, might have sounded something like that. If you were paying attention, you might have noticed some familiar words as we gain some familiarity with Old English. You might have noticed Thy kingdom come was richa, as in Heofon riches weard. You might have noticed give us today our daily bread was hlaf, as in hlaf weard, which is where Lord comes from. There was where God dwells, on Heovonom. We've again Heovonom. Heovon is Heovon reaches weard, right, from Cadman. And then notice the word for Amen. They didn't borrow the Latin. They took sothlicha. And the L-I-C-E, the lice on the end of the word, is like L-Y for us, sothly. And soth, you remember, is sooth, as in soothsayer, truth teller. Lovely. Well, now it is time, if I can get my slide to advance, for my all-time favorite career encapsulating, faith and learning integrating, possibly not true, but I really probably think it is, word story. And the subject is Hocus Pocus, which apparently comes in a spray. Have to get some of that. So where does Hocus Pocus come from? It's what the magician taps his or her hat and says Hocus Pocus, and that's the magic words. Say the magic words, which might be please or Hocus Pocus in your house, and then pulls a bunny or the Titanic or the Statue of Liberty out of the hat, however the trick goes. Where did this term come from? Well, we're going to look into that. Here's what the venerable OED has to say under etymology for this phrase. It says it appears early in the 17th century as the appellation, that just means title or name, of a juggler. And I should point out that juggler at this time was closer to French jongleur. It didn't just mean someone who threw balls or chainsaws and bowling balls up in the air with dexterity. It was someone who did magic. They might also be storytellers, sort of carnival entertainers, or maybe court entertainers, but it was much broader meaning than we have today. So it was the name of a juggler, and apparently the assumed name of a particular conjurer, that is, one individual, derived from the sham Latin formula employed by him. So he used a Latin-sounding formula, hocus pocus, sounds Latin-y, right, to do his magic. This is one of the quotes given by the OED, and I've given you the book it's from. This is from 1655, a text from Thomas Andy, Candle in the Dark. He says, I will speak of one man, this is that original Hocus Pocus guy, who went about in King James his time. By the way, put that King James his time as a way of doing possessive King James's time in your back pocket, because we're going to come back to that later. Who called himself the King's Majesty's most excellent Hocus Pocus. Imagine that on your business card. And so was called because at the playing of every trick, he used to say Hocus Pocus, Tontus, Talentus, Vade, Celeriter, Jubeo, a dark composure of words to blind the eyes. What's the purpose of the fake Latin, the dog Latin? To blind the eyes of the beholders, as if to say, look over here with one hand while he's doing the trick with the other hand, to make his trick pass more currently without discovery. Well, what's the tone that Thomas Addy is using? Take a look at the whole title of his book. A Candle in the Dark, that is, I'm the harbinger of light to you, or a treatise concerning the nature of witches and witchcraft, being advice to judges, sheriffs, judges, justices of the peace, and grand jurymen what to do before they pass sentence on such as are arraigned for their lives as witches. So, an anti-witching book, 1655. Thomas Addy is calling out witches. One way you know them, apparently, is they say things like, Hocus Pocus. Keep that in mind in case you hear someone say that word. You might just want to go and, I don't know, burn them. There's also a book from earlier than that, 1635, which is more of a manual called Hocus Pocus Junior. I assume that's sort of how to be an apprentice in the Hocus Pocus. The anatomy, which is to say the kind of all the elements of legerdemain, which is sleight of hand, how to use your hands to perform tricks, called the art of juggling. So it wasn't always pejorative or the name of an individual. It had a generic meaning by 1635 as the art of the sleight of hand. The OED is not done, however. After it points to Addy, there's in a smaller font these words. The notion that Hocus was a parody of the Latin words used in the Eucharist, hello, rests merely, my italics, on a conjecture thrown out by Tillotson. Well, who is Tillotson? Tillotson is the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 17th century. And he writes in 1694, in all probability, those common juggling words of Hocus Pocus are nothing else but a corruption of Hoc est Corpus, by way of ridiculous imitation of the priests of the Church of Rome in their trick of transubstantiation. So think about your church history. John Tillotson, Archbishop of Canterbury, that makes him Anglican, an archbishop of the Anglican Church. In this time, there's an enormous division between this first Protestant church and Rome, the Catholic Church. And so Tillotson is deeply anti-Catholic. There's also a theological difference. Roman Catholics believed in transubstantiation, which is the bread is transformed into the actual body of Jesus in the Mass, and the wine is transubstantiated into the blood of Jesus. And thus it's a kind of miracle which takes place when the priest says the words Hocus Corpus Meus. And he is saying that this trick done by those Roman Catholics is the origin of Hocus Pocus, which gives him a kind of bias. And I think that's why the OED puts his suggestion in a smaller font, because he's got a horse in this race. So what is he talking about? First of all, let's look at the Latin. When the priest, and the priest would have been speaking Latin in the service at this time, when the priest says, Hoc est corpus meum, quoting Jesus, he's saying, hoc, this, est, looks like is, right? Because, of course, Latin, Italic, branch of Indo-European languages, that's related to German and English. So it looks familiar. Corpus gives us words like corporal, corpuscle, corps, esprit de corps in French, is body. And meum, in Latin, you put the adjective after the noun. So this is body, my. And just think about that for a minute. Let's say that you are some, I don't know, not very educated person with your not very educated buddy, and you go to attend church in the 17th century, and the service is held in Latin, and you definitely don't know Latin, and you're watching, and there's the priest and other holy people up front. You're rather divided from them, and at some point, the priest holds up a wafer or a piece of bread, says some words, and then you receive the host. On the way out, I'm just imagining the scene. Maybe on the way out the door, you ask your buddy next to you, what was all that business with the bread? And they said, oh, I have a little bit of learning. That was the Hocus Corpus meum bit where the priest turns that bread into the body of Jesus, broken and given for you. And you're like, no way. And he's like, yeah, way. And you repeat it back, and it turns a little sing-songy. It turns Hocus Corpus. And that might have been the origin of the power attributed to the words Hocus Pocus. Pull a rabbit out of a hat, pull Jesus out of a wafer of bread. Reduplication would mean repeating again, duplicating again. In fact, is what this is. This is true reduplication. Hocus Pocus Filiokus. And there is a Norwegian children's book right there with a, clown in a box, kind of fun childhood magic. Well, what is Filiokus? If you have your Nicene Creed, which begins, I believe in the Father, a creed of the Christian Church, one of the I believe creed parts is, I believe in the Holy Spirit, and it goes, qui ex patre filioque procedit, which is who from the Father, Son and, the que is the and, filio, like filial piety, or affiliate, it means son, procedit in classical Latin. So filioque is another bit of Holy Latin, which got pulled into the Hocus Pocus up there in the Scandinavia, in Norway. Also, in a in a Germanic dialect, Western this time, Netherlands, we have this web page. The magic of the name right there. I never try to pronounce Netherlandish. They have Hocus Pocus Pilatus Pas. That's their magical phrase. Well, what's the other? You probably can get it. The Nicene Creed goes on to talk about the Philios, about Jesus, and say who suffered under Pontius Pilate, died, was crucified, and buried the third day, if you know that. In Latin, it's sub Pontio Pilato, passus est, et sepultus est. Under Pontius Pilate, he suffered. And the Pontio and the passus turn into the other words, pulled into Hocus Pocus. So what do we have? Hocus Pocus probably comes from Hocus Corpus meum, the word magic of transubstantiation. And I just want to pause and say that this is basically what I do for a living in a word story, the magic of words. I'm a Christian. I start every English class I have with a liturgical response. I say, in the beginning was the Word. And my students respond, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And occasionally I'll say, and I invite you to reflect, as I'm doing throughout my career, to meditate, to reflect on the significance of language as an attribute of God. And what that means for English majors, for why we're here, both in a creational sense, and why we're here studying language. In addition to my faith life, this also reminds me of, rhetoric. Rhetoric is just the study of the power of words. It reminds me of, there's a category of speech, we call it illocutionary speech, in which words have actual power. If a judge says, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the words aren't describing words, they're doing words. The words do the thing that they say. It's the saying pronounce you that makes them be man and wife. It reminds me of word power in the area of taboo words. That there are all kinds of taboos around the world where people just feel that words have some kind of mystical power to them. Often written words, often Latin words, or words which are names of people who've died. In some Australian Aboriginal languages, if someone dies, their name is taken out of circulation, and no one is called that anymore. I think even people who are currently called that got to change their name. And in some cases, even like words that rhyme with the dead person's name, you got to get rid of those words too. And of course, the most common word power, if you've watched any modern television, if you've been in third grade, the words you can't say on television, the 7 words you can't say on the air, and the words you can't say in elementary school. So if I say, damn, you might be getting a little edgy depending on your background and level of sensitivity to these kinds of things. Or if I say shit, which is, I'm thinking of the IPA of shit right now, long S, capital IT. It's just some sounds, but you're thinking, whoo, professor said shit. And if I say fuck, you're going to think, whoa, some kind of, holy or appropriate thing has been like violated. Words have power in many different ways. And one of the ways that words have power is for Catholics in transubstantiation. Look at the image there on the page. Do you see how when the priest's putting the wafer into the man's mouth, the gold which represents heaven is coming down into his mouth with it? Words have the power to bless. There's a line in the Old Testament, I forget the reference, that says, words have the power to kill or to give life. And this is an example of life-giving words. So Hocus Pocus, my favorite word story. It's time to Cadman Eyes once again, so read along with me or echoing slightly afterwards. And I do encourage you, get out your sheet. Think meaning, feel alliteration, think pronunciation rules, and do this daily. Now shall we praise Heaven Kingdom's guardian. Nu shulan herian heaven reaches weard. Meo todes meachta and his mod ye thank. Werk wulder vader, swa he wunder ye was, che drichten or onsteade. He eres chop, orden bearnum, he ovanta hrova, halli shippend. Famidanyard, monken is weard, che drichten, after teoda, firum foldan freya almichti. Hope those words are becoming familiar to you. Today we're going to talk about one more feature of Old English poetry, and then I will leave you to work on some Old English poetry. If you will get out the sheet that I've attached to this lecture, I call it the Punning Pope. The Punning Pope is St. Gregory, and get that ready, but first we got to talk about one more feature to be looking for in Old English poetry. We've talked about oral formulaic features, like the repetition of H.A. Drichten. I was going to say H.A. Cadman. The alliterative formula of Old English. Today we're going to talk about kennings. That might be a new word to you. Kennings are a compound word built from 2 existing words, because German, a Germanic language like Old English, still true of modern German, loves, instead of borrowing words, to use native bits and put them together in new, unexpected ways. And there are 2 kinds of kennings. First of all, literal kennings, and then there will also be metaphorical kennings. So, okay, a 2-word sort of compounded, ignore whether they're written as one word or separated with a space or hyphenated. All of that's just modern details. Literal kennings equal the sum of their parts. Jeswink day just means toil day. So a way of referring to how many days it's been 5 toil days since I was, at the lakes on Sunday. Wine May is kinsman. Wine looks like it might be wine, but it's wine and it means joy. So I've been hanging out here in the Gold Hall. Hey, that's another kenning. Gold Hall Heorot with my friend Hrafgar and my buddy Beowulf. Grendel's outside roaming around. And these are my Wine May, my joy kinsmen. And who's the king to me? Gold Yifa. Gold Yifa. gold giver. Well, a king is a gold giver. You read Beowulf, the largesse of the king giving out. There's a kind of economy of gold circulating where people go and maybe fight and take gold from the enemies, give it to the king, and he gives it back to them as honors. So there's nothing complicated about these. There is something a little complicated about metaphorical kennings, which are not the sum of their parts. They're little miniature word games. They're little puzzles. So let's walk through some of these little puzzles and figure them out. World candle. The world candle is the way they would refer to the sun. Not the way, but a way, if it fits the alliterative line. Isn't that lovely? It's a metaphor. The world sun is like a candle to the world. Mere hengest. Hengest is a name. It also means horse. Mere, like maritime. Submarine is ocean. So what is the horse that goes on the ocean? That's the boat. Heovones winne. Winne is joy. This one is lovely for these people who tried to scratch out a living and were fighting for pay, always martial, always in battle, died young, average life expectancy in the 30s. The poet would look at the dawn and call it heaven or the sky's joy. Isn't that lovely? Swanrad. Rad, we've seen back in our Proto-Indo-European roots. The swan's riding place, or the swan's road, possibly it might be interpreted. Well, what road does the swan travel on? The sea. How about Bonhus, bone house? I've been to some of those in Europe. That's actually not what we're talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look up charnel house online. The house made of bones is you. It's your body. So these are little word games Anglo-Saxon shopes like to throw in. It is also the source of the name of our departmental newsletter, which is Word Hoard. And if you're at Northwestern, you probably wonder where that came from. Well, many years ago, I guess 15 years ago, volume 15, we said, hey, we need a newsletter. And they said, well, all right, well, I can have a competition. And everyone put a name in the box for, what we want it to be called. Someone put in Word Hoard. And it turned out that was the only entry, I believe. And that person was, of course, me. And so today we have the Word Hoard. Maybe we don't even think about Word Hoard. This comes from Beowulf. Beowulf is great wordum and workum. He's great in words and in works. He can fight, but he can also talk. And so when he arrives at Hrothgar's kingdom, this is how it's described. Him, that is to him, se yldiste ansvarada. To him the eldest, the Beowulf, the respected one, answered, Weird is Wiese, the wisest of the weird of the troop. He onleak his word hoard. Weird is Wiese, word hoard onleak. Notice the AAAX alliteration, right? He unlocked his word hoard. Do you see what that is? That saying, it's the word vocabulary, basically, or maybe it's the thoughts of one's mind. But you have a hoard, like a dragon has a hoard of treasure. And in that hoard that is locked within inside of you are your gems, are your precious things. You're precious. And what are those? They're your words. And I thought, what a wonderful name for a newsletter. I didn't think it'd ever be chosen. Way too nerdy. But that's why we have a word hoard. And it is a metaphorical kenning. So the next time one comes out, you can say, hey, would you pass me the metaphorical kenning? The one over on the coffee table over there. Well, now that we know about kennings, we're going to look at our last text. I call it the Punning Pope. Now you do need that handout because we're going to walk through it. A little bit of context. The Anglo-Saxons, when they came to England in the 450s and onward, were not Christian. They were pagan. Christianity came to England in 597. Again, a good date to remember. And Pope Gregory is the motivating force. He's called the Great. And he sends Augustine. This is not Augustine of Hippo. This is another Augustine. He's called Augustine of Canterbury. That's a portrait of him inside an H over there. And Augustine is sent by Pope Gregory to Christianize the English, the Angles and Saxons. And supposedly, here's how the story goes. This all happens after Pope Gregory sees Anglo-Saxon slaves for sale at a marketplace in Rome in 595 or so. So grab your text. We're going to walk through it. Write in notes. I'll give you observations. And we're not actually looking for kennings in this because it's not poetry, it's prose. But there is still wordplay in here, and that's what one of your homework questions about. So listen carefully, and let's walk through. Got your handout? Good. Tha je lamp hit, you're getting used to hit being it, at summum sala, at some time, swa yet for oft death, as it still, that is, yet, often does. Okay, so this is a common occurrence. That Englische, notice the SC making a sh, that's an early spelling of English with an SC instead of an SH. That Englische cheap men brochten her ware to Romanabury. So that English cheap men brought their wares to Romanabury. Let's look at the two words. Cheap men. That sounds a lot like cheap, and it is in fact the origin of our word cheap. But it didn't mean inexpensive. They were not inexpensive men. They were merchants. They were sellers. Because the English word cheapan, the verb, meant to sell. And a linguist would say, semantically, its meaning has narrowed from to sell to sell for a good price or at a low price. So they were cheap men. You know the region of London called Eastcheap, Street of Eastcheap? It's the east part of the marketplace. Say brochton, with the rumbly H in the middle, spelled with a GH today. Heora war, their wares to Romanabury, to Rome. That's, of course, where Pope Gregory is. And Romanabury. The end, with the fronted G, is like Bury, like Canterbury, B-U-R-Y. Means town. And you see Romana, to the Roman town. And thus, you see Romans right in a much longer original word for Rome. And Gregorius, Eoda, he went, be there a strat, along the street, to tham Englishum manum. Notice we're in dative following the pronoun to, and you see some familiar endings, tham Englishum manum. And then what is he doing? Heura thing shiawienda. Boy, that last one's fun to say. Looking at their wares. That last verb, sheyawiyenda, is a participle. He's looking at. Notice that's our word show. But he's not showing the wares, he's looking at them. That word has flipped its meaning from to point out something to be the one looking at it. So he's basically browsing at what wares have come from the English merchants. Tha yeseach, there's that ya from the past. Then he saw, hey, betwixt tham warum, among or between the wares. There's another um, right? Cheape knichtes. Okay. Knecht, this is a compound word. Knecht is cognate with German Knecht. Just means people. And what would be a cheape knecht? It would be a person for sale. That's why that word is slaves. Cheap people. Yeseta, they were set there, among the wares. Tha waren huites lichaman. They were of a white body. Notice we're in genitive now. Of, that es on wheat, of a white body. It's a way of saying something is white, saying like of a dark complexion, or say a person of color. It's using genitive as a way of attributing a characteristic. And they were feyeres andwilitan. Andwilitan, say that out loud. It's face. And they had a fair in the sense of light-skinned face. Of fair face. Also genitive. Men. They were men of white body and of fair face. And adelicha yefeaxuda. And nobly haired. Okay. I'm seeing a little bit of racism here in that these particular slaves interested Gregory because they have a light skin. But the history of skin color prejudice and devilish associations and Shakespeare's Othello will leave all that for another course. So, what does he do? Gregorius da behold their knappena willita. Willita, isn't that a lovely word for fairness? So, the fairness of the boys. And befran, and asked, of whilcher a theod he ye brochte weron. So what's the theod? What's the people? What nation are these whitey people brought from? Tha said him man, then said to him a man, someone. Notice that's verb, object, subject, VOS. Then said to him someone, that he of Englalanda were, that they were from Englaland. And that's like our world, England, with a little la 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 in the middle, because it's still got the word Angle, as in Anglo-Saxons, audible in it. Englalanda. And that they are a theod Mensch, swawuliti were. And the adjective for fair is wuliti, with a fronted G, wuliti. Lovely English word. And that the nation's people were thus fair. If you know German or Yiddish, or if you're from the Northeast, you hear the word Mensch. What a Mensch. Or der Mensch, the person, in Mensch. Gregorius, he's a curious guy. Eft, after, again. Tha Gregorius befran, whether that landes folk Christen were they heaven. Could you almost understand that? Then he asked whether that land's folk were Christians or heathens. That would concern him as the Pope, right? Him man said, here's our language in a blender, again, right? Syntax in a blender. Object, to him. Man, subject, said, verb. OSV now. You can do that in an inflected language. That he heathen aware. They told him they're heathens. They are not Christian. This is moving. Gregorius tha of inweardra heortan. Gregory then, from his innermost heart, langsuma sitche tunga teach. He a long sighing, sitche tunga teach, he drew. And quoth, walla wah. That's my interpretation of that word. The word well away exists still in England in some places, or has at least within a few centuries. This is a cry of woe. Walla wah. He's disturbed. Why? That they're slaves? That they're not Christians? It's actually racial and theological. Walla wah, that swaferes hues men, that's that genitive of attribution again, that men of, see the genitive es, of such fair color, hue, right, H-U-E, sindon, tham, that has a dative on the V, to the swearten devle under theoda. And this is the first time he's having a little fun with words. Or maybe with colors, color play. Do you see what he said? It's such a shame that people of such a fair, light color are under theoda to the dark devil. Just doesn't match, doesn't fit. Couple notes. The word for dark, sweart. Can you hear the word in modern English that's cognate with? Swarthy, yes. Deovla. Now look at under theod. Jump up about 5, 6, 7 lines. He originally asked from what of which or a theod they were brought. So what is subjugated? They don't have the adjective subjugated. They have under theoded, under nationed, under peopled. Got it? Well, he's got more questions. Eft, again, he axoda. Axoda is a past tense verb. Asked. Put that into IPA in your mind. Axoda. X is a compound sound. It makes a k and then a s. So this would be the back A, K-S-O-D, schwa. Axoda. I find it just deliciously ironic and interesting that metathesis has happened to this word several times. Metathesis is switching places. And that what switches places is the K and the S. So they said axoda, KS, whereas the word then switched to asked, SK. But in one of the cutting edges of the English language, African American vernacular English, you hear, I asked you a question. Axed, A-K-S-E-D. It's kind of historically delightful that even though that's not the prestige dialect or form of English, it is, in fact, the oldest written form of English we have. And if authority goes by age, by antiquity, at least back as far as we have textual representations, axed is originally the way this word was written. Now, I'm not using words like true or correct or wrong or bad or false, just saying there's historical precedent, and the earliest historical precedent is for axed. I asked you a question. So what does he want to know now? Who their nama were, what their people's name was. They he ofkommen, which they came from. Him was antwoord, to him was answered, that he angle je name noda waren. You see name right in the middle of name noda. The rest is basically suffixes and prefixes. And they're angle, they're called angles. Da quathe, then he said, richtliche, richt, R-I-G-H-T, liche, lice is li, rightly. He sent anglia hatten, rightly they are called angels, forthon, for the they he angla willita habath. We've seen willita because they have the fairness or beauty of angla, not angla, but angla of angels. And so he's both making a comparison of the color in his worldview. The devil looks like an Ethiopian. That's actually written down a lot in Christian literature. And God is light, which is, of course, light-skinned. So there's a racial history to the Christian images of metaphysical beings. But he's also saying that it's appropriate that the angles have the beauty of angels. You hear, right? And swilkum, for such, ye davenath, it is fitting, that he on heovonum, engla ye feron beon, that they in heavens, that's actually, the heavens, that they be the companions of angels. Yet, that yet, she makes a Y sound, yet again, it's like, there's someone next to him writing down what he's saying, like, oh, really? Yet again? You got more of these, do you? Okay, keep them coming. Yet tha Gregorius befran who their shire nama were. He asked how or what their shire's name was, how their shire was named. SC for shire. They the knapan of alada waren, that they had been led from. And the formula, him man said that the shire men, what would people from that shire be, but the shire men, just like the reeve or overseer of that shire is the shire reeve or sheriff, whereon Daya Yahatana. It's called Daya. And here you need to pause and know a little bit of Latin. Gregory, being a Latin speaker, would hear de, Latin for from, and ira, with a bar over the a macron. He would have heard from ira, gives us the word irate and ire, from wrath. So, okay, that word in Anglo-Saxon sounds like the Latin for from wrath. Gregorius antwoordde, and there are no quotation marks in the original, right? Well, he sent der Jehatna. Well, they are called der men, for thon they he sent from Grammon Jeneroda, because they are rescued, and then he does the Latin and English. From Grammon, from wrath. From whose wrath? God's wrath, the devil's wrath. Why? Because I'm here to save their souls. And to Christus mildherdnisse jechiede, and they are called to Christ's. And here's that word again. We saw it in the Good Samaritan. Mildherdnisse, mild-heartedness. Yet another yet, really. This is probably a just one of those made-up stories rather than a historical event. It's probably apocryphal, because it's just so nice and neat. Yet dahe befran, who is there leo de Koning Jehaten? How's the king called? Him was janswarda, that say Koning alla Jehaten were. I like that. King's name is Al. What, which is our word what. It's also the first word of Beowulf. What? What? Which basically means like, well, or listen up, or what do you know? Tha Gregorius gamenoda mit his wordum. He gamed with his words. Why would a pope be gaming with his words? I'll leave you to figure that out. Todam naman. He gamed with his words to the name, and quoth, hit yedavenoth, it is appropriate, that Alleluia sie gesungen, on tham lande, to love das allmächtigen Schippendes. He says it's appropriate that Alleluia be sung in that lamb to praise of the Almighty, and here Cadman helps you out. Shippend. Shaper, creator. So I'm going to leave it to you to figure out why on earth a pope would think puns were significant enough to launch an expedition to Christianize an entire people.